wrong choice. Brendan McGinnis had always prided himself on being methodical. 20 years in cybersecurity consulting had taught him that details mattered, that one small oversight could bring down entire systems. But on that Tuesday morning in October, as he watched his 7-year-old son Tommy scramble around their kitchen looking for his school tablet, Brendan made a decision that would change everything. "Dad, I can't find my tablet anywhere." Tommy's voice carried that edge of panic that only a child late for school could muster. Brendan glanced at his watch. 7:47 a.m. Tommy's bus would arrive in 8 minutes, and Sandra had already left for her consulting firm downtown. The house felt unusually quiet without her morning routine of coffee grinding and phone calls. "Check your backpack again, buddy," Brendan called from the kitchen counter, where he was packing Tommy's lunch. His own laptop sat open beside him, displaying lines of code from his current project, a security audit for a major pharmaceutical company. "It's not there." Tommy appeared in the doorway, his Spider-Man backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder, his dark hair sticking up in 3 different directions. Brendan's eyes swept the living room and spotted Sandra's work iPad on the coffee table, its sleek black case identical to Tommy's school tablet. His wife had always been careless with her devices, leaving them scattered around their suburban Dallas home like expensive paperweights. "Here," Brendan said, grabbing Sandra's iPad and sliding it into Tommy's backpack. "Use Mom's for today. I'll find yours when I get home." Tommy's face brightened. "Thanks, Dad. You're the best." The school bus's distinctive rumble echoed from the street. Brendan ruffled his son's hair and watched him sprint toward the front door, backpack bouncing with each step. Through the window, he saw Tommy climb aboard the familiar yellow vehicle, waving excitedly at his friend Marcus, who had saved him a seat. Brendan allowed himself a small smile. Crisis averted. He had no way of knowing that in exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes, that simple decision would destroy the life he thought he knew. The morning passed uneventfully. Brendan worked from his home office, diving deep into security protocols and firewall configurations. The pharmaceutical company's systems were more vulnerable than their executives realized, but that's why they paid him the big bucks to find and fix the holes. His phone buzzed at 11:30 a.m. Sandra's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, babe," he answered, not looking away from his monitors. "How's the Morrison project going?" Silence stretched for several seconds. Then Sandra's voice, tight with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Brendan, did Tommy take my iPad to school?" Something in her tone made him pause. He'd known Sandra for 15 years, married her for 12. She was always composed, always in control. Even during Tommy's difficult birth, she had maintained that cool professionalism that made her so effective in crisis management consulting. "Yeah, he couldn't find his tablet. I figured it wouldn't be a big deal since you've got your laptop at the office." Brendan leaned back in his chair, suddenly alert. "Why? Is there a problem?" Another pause. No problem. I had some work files on there I need to access. Can you call the school and have them send it home with him today instead of keeping it overnight?" "Sure, but Sandra, I have to go. Client meeting. Love you." The line went dead. Brendan stared at his phone, replaying the conversation. Sandra's voice had carried an undercurrent of something he'd rarely heard from her: fear. In 12 years of marriage, he'd seen her handle corporate disasters, family emergencies, and their son's numerous medical scares with unwavering calm. What could possibly be on her work iPad that would shake her like this? He was still pondering this when his phone rang again at 12:15 p.m. "Mr. McGinnis? This is Mary Hobbs, Tommy's teacher at Oakwood Elementary." "Hi, Mrs. Hobbs. Is everything okay?" The pause was long enough to make his stomach clench. "Mr. McGinnis, you need to come to the school immediately. There's been a situation involving the tablet Tommy brought today." "What kind of situation?" "I can't discuss this over the phone. Please come as soon as possible. The police are already here." The phone slipped from Brendan's suddenly nerveless fingers. Police? At his son's school? His mind raced through possibilities. Had the tablet been stolen? Had Tommy accidentally accessed something he shouldn't have? He was in his truck and speeding toward Oakwood Elementary before Mrs. Hobbs' words fully registered. The police were already there. Already there, as if they'd been waiting. The 20-minute drive felt like an eternity. Brendan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. He kept replaying Sandra's strange phone call, the fear in her voice, her urgent need to get the iPad back. Oakwood Elementary looked like a crime scene. 2 patrol cars sat in the circular drive, their red and blue lights creating an unsettling strobe effect against the brick facade of the school. A small crowd of parents had gathered near the main entrance, whispering among themselves and shooting worried glances at the building. Brendan parked and jogged toward the entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. A uniformed officer, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and kind eyes, intercepted him at the door. "Mr. McGinnis?" "Yes, that's me. Where's my son? Is he okay?" "Your son is fine, sir. I'm Officer Stephen Doyle. We need to talk." The way Officer Doyle said those 5 words, calm, professional, but weighted with unmistakable gravity, made Brendan's blood run cold. "Talk about what?" Officer Doyle gestured toward the administrative wing of the school. "Let's step into the conference room, sir. Mrs. Hobbs and Principal Jefferson are waiting." As they walked down the familiar hallway lined with colorful student artwork, Brendan caught sight of Tommy through the window of his classroom. His son was sitting at his desk, apparently working on a math worksheet, seemingly unaware of the chaos swirling around him. Relief flooded through Brendan's chest. Whatever this was about, at least Tommy was safe. The conference room was cramped and smelled faintly of industrial cleaning solution. Mrs. Hobbs sat at the oval table, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something Brendan had never seen before, barely contained horror. Principal Jefferson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, paced behind her like a caged animal. Officer Doyle closed the door and gestured for Brendan to sit. "Mr. McGinnis, this morning your son brought a tablet to school. Is that correct?" "Yes, his own tablet wasn't working, so I gave him my wife's iPad." "Is there a problem with the school's network? Did it cause some kind of system issue?" Mrs. Hobbs made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Principal Jefferson stopped pacing and stared at Brendan with an expression that seemed equal parts pity and suspicion. Officer Doyle opened a manila folder and placed Sandra's iPad, now sealed in a clear evidence bag, on the table between them. "Mr. McGinnis, when your son tried to access the school's educational apps this morning, the tablet automatically synced with the cloud storage. Mrs. Hobbs was helping him log in when she saw something that made her immediately contact our department." Brendan's mouth went dry. What did she see? Officer Doyle's voice remained steady, professional. "Sir, what we found on this device is horrifying. Before I show you anything, I need to ask, do you have any knowledge of your wife's involvement in illegal activities?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. Illegal activities? Sandra's a crisis management consultant. She helps companies deal with PR disasters, and look at the screen, Mr. McGinnis. Officer Doyle pressed the power button, and Sandra's iPad came to life. The home screen was normal enough. Work apps, social media, a few games. But there, in the corner, was a folder labeled DH Projects. "What's DH stand for?" Officer Doyle asked. Brendan shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe a client name?" Officer Doyle tapped the folder, and Brendan's world exploded into fragments. The folder contained dozens of files, photos, documents, videos. At first glance, they looked like standard business materials. But as Officer Doyle scrolled through them, a pattern emerged that made Brendan's stomach lurch. These weren't corporate crisis management files. They were something far worse. "Mr. McGinnis," Officer Doyle said quietly, "your wife appears to be documenting criminal activities. We're talking about human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. These files contain evidence of at least 15 federal crimes." Brendan stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Photos of shipping containers, encrypted communication logs, financial documents showing massive cash transfers to offshore accounts. And in several of the photos, unmistakably, was Sandra, not just present, leading. "There has to be some mistake," Brendan whispered. Sandra wouldn't, she couldn't. But even as he said the words, pieces began clicking into place. Sandra's frequent business trips to ports in Houston and Los Angeles. Her new consulting clients, who paid exclusively in cash. The way she'd become secretive about her work over the past year, claiming attorney-client privilege when he asked about her projects. Officer Doyle leaned forward. "Mr. McGinnis, I need to ask you directly. Did you know about any of this?" Brendan looked up from the tablet, meeting the officer's steady gaze. "No, I swear to God, I had no idea." Something in his voice must have convinced Officer Doyle, because the man's expression softened slightly. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come to the station for questioning. This is just procedure. You're not under arrest. But given the magnitude of what we've found, we need to establish a timeline and determine what you may have observed without realizing its significance." Brendan nodded numbly. "What about Tommy? Your son can stay at school for now. Mrs. Hobbs has already spoken with the other children. As far as they know, there was just a technical problem with the tablet. Tommy doesn't know anything about this yet." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Brendan's phone buzzed with a text message. Sandra's name appeared on the screen. Emergency came up. "Flying to Seattle for client. We'll be back Friday. Love you both." Brendan stared at the message, and for the first time since this nightmare began, something other than shock filled his chest. Rage. His wife, the woman he'd trusted with his heart, his future, his son, wasn't just a criminal. She was running. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The police station smelled like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Brendan sat in interview room B, his hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup that had gone cold an hour ago. Across from him, Officer Stephen Doyle and Detective Luis Rodriguez had been asking the same questions in different ways for the past 3 hours. "Let's go through this one more time, Mr. McGinnis," Detective Rodriguez said, consulting his notes. He was younger than Doyle, maybe early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that made suspects squirm. But Brendan wasn't a suspect anymore. The polygraph and background check had cleared him of involvement. Now he was something worse, a victim. "Your wife's company, Ackerman Consulting Solutions. When did she start that?" "About 18 months ago," Brendan replied, his voice hoarse from hours of talking. "She'd been working for Morrison and Associates for 8 years, but she wanted to branch out on her own. Said she was tired of making other people rich." "And you never questioned where her clients came from?" Brendan ran a hand through his hair. Sandra was always good at networking. She had contacts from her years at Morrison's, and crisis management is a word-of-mouth business. When things go wrong, people call who they trust. Detective Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Officer Doyle. "Mr. McGinnis, according to our preliminary investigation, Ackerman Consulting Solutions has no legitimate corporate clients. The business license was filed under false information, and the address listed is a mail forwarding service in Chinatown." The words hit Brendan like a physical blow. "That's impossible. She showed me contracts, invoices. All fabricated." Officer Doyle interrupted gently. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit ran a trace on the business accounts this afternoon. Every deposit came from shell companies connected to Derek Hicks." "Who's Derek Hicks?" "A very bad man," Detective Rodriguez said grimly. "He runs human trafficking operations from Mexico to Canada, with Dallas as his central hub. Your wife wasn't just consulting for him. She was his operational partner." Brendan's cup slipped from his numb fingers, spreading cold coffee across the metal table. "You're telling me that Sandra, my Sandra, was involved in human trafficking?" Officer Doyle pulled out a tablet and opened a video file. "Mr. McGinnis, I need to show you something else." This was recovered from the iPad's cloud storage this morning. The video was grainy, shot from what looked like a security camera in a warehouse. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 weeks ago. In the frame, Sandra stood beside a tall man with silver hair and expensive clothes. Derek Hicks, Brendan assumed. They were reviewing papers while other people moved cargo containers in the background. But it wasn't the business transaction that made Brendan's world collapse. It was what happened at the end of the video. Sandra turned to Hicks, rose on her tiptoes, and kissed him. Not a professional peck on the cheek. A deep, intimate kiss that spoke of familiarity and passion. "How long?" Brendan whispered. "Based on the metadata from her files, at least 14 months, Detective Rodriguez said. "Maybe longer." Brendan stared at the frozen video frame, his wife's face captured in profile as she embraced another man. A criminal. A monster who bought and sold human beings like commodities. "Mr. McGinnis, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer," Officer Doyle said. "In the past year, has your wife exhibited any unusual behavior? Changes in routine, unexplained absences, new sources of income?" The floodgates opened. "The trips," Brendan said slowly. "She started traveling constantly about a year ago. Always to port cities, Houston, Los Angeles, Seattle, Miami. She said her new clients were in international logistics." "What about money?" "We've been living better than we should have been able to afford on our combined income. Sandra said her consulting fees were higher than her old salary, but Brendan's voice trailed off as he mentally calculated. Their mortgage payments on the 4-bedroom house in Preston Hollow, Tommy's private school tuition, Sandra's new BMW. Even with his cybersecurity income, the numbers hadn't quite added up. She was bringing in approximately $200,000 a year from her partnership with Hicks, Detective Rodriguez said. Blood money from some of the worst crimes imaginable. Brendan's phone rang. Sandra's name flashed on the screen. "Should I answer it?" he asked. Officer Doyle nodded, gesturing to a recording device. "Act normal. Don't let her know we've found anything." Brendan took a deep breath and accepted the call. "Hey, babe." "Hi, honey. How was Tommy's day at school?" Sandra's voice sounded strained, but she was clearly trying to project normalcy. "Fine. He did great on his spelling test." Brendan caught Officer Doyle's eye. The detective was scribbling notes. "When did you say you'd be back from Seattle?" "Friday evening. This client situation is more complicated than I expected." "What kind of crisis are they dealing with?" A pause. "Personnel issues. I can't really discuss details. You know how it is with confidentiality agreements." Brendan almost laughed at the irony. Here he sat in a police station, learning that his wife was a criminal who had been lying to him for over a year, and she was still maintaining her cover story. "I miss you," he said, and was surprised to find that some part of him actually meant it. 12 years of marriage didn't evaporate in a single afternoon, even when faced with betrayal this massive. "I miss you too. Kiss Tommy for me. I have to go. My client is calling." The line went dead. "She's not in Seattle," Detective Rodriguez said. "We checked with TSA. No record of Sandra McGinnis on any flights to Seattle today." "Then where is she?" "Probably meeting with Hicks to figure out damage control." "Your wife is smart. She knows that sending Tommy to school with her iPad was a catastrophic mistake. She's either planning to run permanently or trying to figure out how to contain the situation." Officer Doyle leaned forward. "Mr. McGinnis, there's something else you need to know. We've been building a case against Derek Hicks for 2 years. He's responsible for trafficking over 300 people through Texas in that time. Young women and children from Central America, mostly, promised jobs and safety, then sold into forced labor or worse." The room spun around Brendan. Sandra knew about this? She was more than complicit. According to the documents on her iPad, she was the one who developed the operational security protocols that kept Hicks' organization running. Your wife's crisis management skills made her invaluable to a criminal enterprise. What happens now? Detective Rodriguez closed his notebook. "We're coordinating with the FBI and IC to take down Hicks' entire operation. But Sandra is in the wind, and she's got access to significant cash reserves. If she doesn't surface soon, she could disappear completely." "What about Tommy?" "That's complicated," Officer Doyle said. "Legally, you have full custody since Sandra isn't here to contest it. But if she's arrested, there will be questions about any assets that might be proceeds from criminal activity. Your house, cars, bank accounts, everything might be subject to forfeiture proceedings." Brendan felt like he was drowning. In the space of 6 hours, he'd lost his wife, learned she was a criminal, and now faced the possibility of losing everything he'd worked for. "There is one more thing," Detective Rodriguez said, pulling out another evidence bag. "We found this in a hidden compartment of your wife's iPad case." Inside the bag was a small silver key attached to a keyring with the logo of First National Storage. "Storage unit?" Brendan asked. "Most likely. If your wife was smart, and everything we've seen suggests she was, she'd have kept insurance, documents, cash, maybe evidence against Hicks in case she ever needed leverage." Officer Doyle stood up. "Mr. McGinnis, I know this has been overwhelming. We're going to release you now, but we need you to stay in Dallas and remain available for questioning. We also need you to contact us immediately if Sandra tries to reach you again." As Brendan prepared to leave, Detective Rodriguez handed him a business card. "Mr. McGinnis, I want you to understand something. Your wife didn't just betray you personally. She was part of an organization that destroyed hundreds of lives. When we take her down, and we will, it won't just be about justice for you. It'll be justice for every person who suffered because of what she helped create." Brendan pocketed the card and walked out of the police station into the fading October afternoon. The world looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but he felt like he was seeing it through different eyes. As he drove home to face his 7-year-old son and figure out how to explain that their lives had just imploded, one thought kept running through his mind. Sandra thought she was smart enough to run from this. She thought her crisis management skills would save her. She had no idea that she'd just made an enemy of the one person who knew how to find anyone, anywhere, anytime. Brendan McGinnis hadn't spent 20 years in cybersecurity just to build firewalls. He'd learned how to tear them down. Chapter 3. The Hunt Begins. Brendan sat in his driveway for 20 minutes, staring at his house and trying to figure out how to walk through that front door. The place looked exactly the same. Red brick facade, carefully manicured lawn, Sandra's prized rose bushes flanking the entrance. But now it felt like a museum of lies, every corner hiding secrets he'd been too blind to see. Tommy would be getting off the bus in 10 minutes. His son had no idea that their world had collapsed while he was learning fractions and practicing cursive. The storage unit key felt heavy in Brendan's pocket as he finally forced himself out of the truck. Whatever Sandra had hidden away, it would have to wait. Right now, he needed to focus on the only innocent person in this mess. Dad, Tommy's voice carried from the street as the school bus pulled away. He came running up the driveway, backpack bouncing, face bright with the kind of uncomplicated joy that made Brendan's chest ache. Hey, buddy. How was school? Great. Mrs. Hobbs said there was a problem with Mom's tablet, but it got fixed. And guess what? Marcus brought Pokemon cards for lunch and… Tommy, Brendan interrupted gently, kneeling down to his son's eye level. We need to talk about something important. The excitement on Tommy's face faded. At 7, he was already learning to read adult expressions, to sense when something was wrong. Is Mom okay? Mom is… Brendan struggled for words that would be both honest and age-appropriate. Mom had to go away for a while for work. It might be longer than we originally thought. How long? I don't know yet, son. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm going to take care of you. We're going to be fine. Tommy's lower lip trembled slightly, but he nodded with the solemn dignity that 7-year-olds sometimes displayed when they sensed adults needed them to be brave. Can I call her? Not right now, but maybe soon. That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Brendan sat in his home office and opened his laptop. For the first time in their marriage, he was going to investigate his wife. 20 years in cybersecurity had taught him that everyone left digital footprints, and Sandra was no exception. He started with the basics: credit reports, bank statements, social media activity. What he found painted a picture of careful deception that stretched back almost 2 years. The woman he'd thought he knew had been methodically creating a parallel life. Secret credit cards, a separate bank account he'd never known about, even a cell phone plan under her maiden name. But more disturbing were the gaps. Periods where Sandra had claimed to be in one city while her credit card usage showed she was somewhere completely different. Brendan pulled up airline records, hotel bookings, rental car agreements. A pattern emerged that made his blood run cold. Every time Sandra had claimed to be consulting for a legitimate client, she'd actually been in a port city during what federal databases showed were major human trafficking operations. She hadn't just stumbled into Derek Hicks' organization. She'd been a founding partner. His phone buzzed. Text message from Sandra. Missing you and Tommy. This client's situation is worse than I thought. Might need to extend trip through next week. Everything okay at home? Brendan stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Everything's fine. Tommy misses you. When you know more about timing, let me know. Love you. The last 2 words tasted like ash, but he needed Sandra to believe everything was normal until he could figure out his next move. By midnight, Brendan had compiled a comprehensive digital profile of his wife's criminal activities. Bank transfers totaling over $400,000 in the past year. Flight records showing she'd been in Houston during 3 separate ICE raids that had nearly caught Hicks' operation. Email fragments recovered from deleted files that discussed inventory management and transportation logistics in terms that made Brendan sick to his stomach. But he also found something else. Something that changed everything. Buried in Sandra's cloud storage, encrypted but not well enough to stop someone with Brendan's skills, was a folder labeled Insurance Policy. Inside were audio recordings, photos, and documents that didn't just implicate Derek Hicks. They implicated dozens of other people. Politicians, judges, business leaders, law enforcement officers. Sandra had been documenting everything, collecting evidence on everyone involved in or supporting Hicks' operation. Brendan leaned back in his chair, a cold realization washing over him. Sandra wasn't just running from the police. She was running from Derek Hicks, who would kill her without hesitation if he knew she had evidence that could bring down his entire network. His phone rang. Detective Rodriguez. Mr. McGinnis, sorry to call so late. We've got a development. Derek Hicks' warehouse was raided tonight, but the place was cleaned out. Someone tipped him off. Sandra? Most likely. But here's the interesting part. We found evidence that someone had been there recently, copying files from his office computers. Professional job, the kind of thing that requires serious tech skills. Brendan's mind raced. What kind of files? Financial records, mostly. Banking information, client lists, operational schedules. Someone was gathering intelligence. Detective, there's something I need to tell you. Brendan spent the next hour walking Rodriguez through everything he'd discovered in Sandra's digital files. The insurance policy folder, the recordings, the comprehensive evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of Dallas society. Jesus Christ, Rodriguez whispered when Brendan finished. She's got enough evidence to bring down half the city. Which means Hicks will do anything to stop her. Or she'll use it as leverage to negotiate immunity. Brendan was quiet for a long moment. Detective, what happens if Sandra just disappears? If she takes this evidence and vanishes completely, then Hicks rebuilds his operation, and hundreds more people suffer. And your wife gets away with being complicit in crimes that destroyed countless lives. After hanging up, Brendan poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and stood at his kitchen window, looking out at the suburb where he'd thought he was building a normal life. Somewhere out there, Sandra was running scared, probably planning to use her evidence against Hicks to secure safe passage out of the country. She thought she could just walk away from the devastation she'd helped create. Leave him to explain to their son why mommy was never coming home. Leave her victims to suffer while she lived comfortably on blood money in some non-extradition country. Sandra had made one critical error in her calculations, though. She'd underestimated what Brendan would do when pushed to the edge. He pulled out his phone and sent her another text. Tommy's asking when you'll be home. He made you a drawing at school today. I know this work situation is complicated, but he really misses his mom. The response came quickly. Tell him I love him so much. I'm trying to wrap this up as quickly as possible. This client is just very demanding. Maybe we can plan a special weekend when I get back. Brendan smiled grimly as he typed his reply. That sounds perfect. Tommy will be so excited. By the way, I found your storage unit key in your jewelry box. Should I grab anything from there while you're gone? 3 minutes passed. 5 minutes. 10. Finally, storage unit key? I don't know what you mean. Maybe it's from your old apartment. Brendan's smile widened. Sandra was smart, but she was also panicked. And panicked people made mistakes. He sent one final message. You're probably right. Love you. Stay safe. Then he opened his laptop and began typing code. By dawn, he would have a program capable of tracking Sandra's location through any digital device she touched. By the end of the week, he would know exactly where she was hiding. And then the real hunt would begin. Sandra McGinnis thought she could run from justice. She thought she could disappear and leave everyone else to clean up her mess. She was about to learn what happened when you betrayed someone who specialized in finding things that people wanted to keep hidden. Chapter 4. The Storage Unit. The first national storage facility sat on a dusty lot in East Dallas, surrounded by chain-link fence and struggling palm trees. At 6 a.m., the place was deserted except for a security guard nursing coffee in a glass booth and reading yesterday's newspaper. Brendan had waited until Tommy left for school before driving across town. His son had asked 3 more times when mommy would be home, each question like a knife twist in Brendan's chest. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that his mother was a criminal who might never come back? Unit 247 was in the back corner of the facility, away from the main traffic patterns. As Brendan approached with Sandra's key, he noticed that the lock looked new, installed recently, probably within the past few months. The door rolled up with a metallic screech that seemed to echo across the empty complex. Inside, Sandra had created a professional-grade operations center. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their labels written in her neat handwriting: logistics, personnel, financial, insurance. A desk held 2 laptops, external hard drives, and a sophisticated document scanner. But it was the far wall that made Brendan's blood run cold. Photos, hundreds of them, organized in neat rows like a military briefing room. Images of shipping containers, warehouse facilities, transportation vehicles. And people, mostly young women and children, looking terrified and exhausted. These weren't just evidence files. They were trophies. Brendan moved to the filing cabinets, his hands shaking as he opened the first drawer. Inside were manila folders containing detailed records of human trafficking operations spanning 3 years. Names, ages, countries of origin, transportation routes, final destinations. Each folder represented dozens of lives destroyed. The financial cabinet contained records of payments totaling over $2 million. Sandra hadn't just been Derek Hicks' operational partner. She'd been his co-owner, taking a 50% cut of profits from every transaction. But it was the insurance cabinet that contained the real bombshell. Audio recordings of conversations with politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials. Photos of cash exchanges. Bank records showing payments to public officials. Sandra had been systematically documenting everyone involved in protecting Hicks' operation, building leverage that could bring down a corruption network spanning multiple states. And at the bottom of the cabinet, in a fireproof safe, Brendan found something that changed everything. A second set of books. These records showed that Sandra hadn't just been working with Derek Hicks. She'd been working against him, methodically gathering evidence, while simultaneously helping expand his operations. Every transaction, every transport, every political payoff, she'd documented it all. Brendan sank into the desk chair, trying to process what he was seeing. His wife wasn't just a criminal. She was a criminal who'd been planning to betray her partners from the beginning. His phone buzzed. Another text from Sandra. "How's Tommy doing? I know this separation is hard on him." For the first time since this nightmare began, Brendan felt a flicker of genuine rage. She was sitting somewhere safe, probably planning her escape route, while her 7-year-old son cried himself to sleep asking when mommy would come home. He typed back. "He's struggling. He doesn't understand why work is keeping you away so long. Maybe you could call him tonight." "I'll try. This client situation is just incredibly sensitive. I can't really talk much until it's resolved." Brendan photographed every document in the storage unit, uploaded everything to encrypted cloud storage, then made copies of the most damaging files. By the time he finished, the sun was high overhead and the storage facility was bustling with legitimate customers going about their normal business. As he prepared to leave, Brendan's phone rang. "Detective Rodriguez. Mr. McGinnis, we've got a problem. Derek Hicks was found dead in his hotel room this morning." Brendan felt the world tilt. Dead how? Professional hit. 2 shots to the back of the head, execution style. But here's the interesting part. His room had been searched. Someone was looking for something specific. The insurance files? That's our assumption. "Mr. McGinnis, your wife is now officially the only person who can bring down this trafficking network. She's also the only person who can identify the shooters, which makes her incredibly valuable to law enforcement and incredibly dangerous to everyone else involved." "Exactly. We've reached out to the FBI, but without knowing where she is, there's not much we can do except wait for her to surface." After hanging up, Brendan sat in his truck in the storage facility parking lot, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Sandra had been playing a long game, positioning herself to take over Hicks' operation while simultaneously gathering evidence to destroy anyone who threatened her. But Hicks' murder changed the equation. Now Sandra was running from people who killed without hesitation, people who had resources and connections that made escape nearly impossible, unless she had help. Brendan pulled out his laptop and connected to the storage facility's Wi-Fi network. Within 30 minutes, he'd identified a security vulnerability in their system that gave him access to the facility's surveillance cameras. The footage from the past week told a fascinating story. Sandra had visited the storage unit 3 times since her trip to Seattle began. But she hadn't come alone. A tall man with silver hair, Derek Hicks, had accompanied her twice. On their final visit, just 2 days ago, they'd loaded several boxes into Hicks' SUV. But more interesting was who else had been watching. The cameras showed a black sedan parked across the street during each of Sandra's visits. Different license plates each time, but the same 2 occupants, professional-looking men who photographed everyone coming and going from the facility. Sandra was being hunted by Hicks' former partners, people who needed to eliminate the only witness who could destroy them, which meant she would need help from someone she trusted, someone who had the skills to keep her hidden and the motivation to protect her, someone like her husband. Brendan's phone buzzed with a new message. "Brendan, I need to see you. Tonight, 8 p.m., Reunion Tower Observation Deck. Come alone." Don't tell anyone. I'll explain everything. He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Is everything okay? You sound scared. I am scared. I've made some terrible mistakes, and now people are trying to hurt our family. Please, just meet me tonight. I need your help. Brendan smiled grimly as he put his phone away. After 3 days of running, Sandra was finally ready to come home. She thought she could manipulate him, play on his love for her and his desire to protect their family. She had no idea that he'd spent the past 72 hours learning exactly what kind of person she really was. Tonight, Sandra McGinnis would discover that her husband was much more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Chapter 5. The Tower. Reunion Tower's observation deck offered a panoramic view of Dallas at night, the city lights spreading out like a constellation in all directions. At 8 p.m. on a Wednesday evening, the tourist attraction was nearly deserted, just a handful of couples taking romantic photos and a bored security guard scrolling through his phone. Brendan arrived 15 minutes early and positioned himself near the north windows, where he could see the elevators and all entrance points. 20 years of cybersecurity work had taught him to always control his environment, and tonight that meant being prepared for anything. Sandra emerged from the elevator at exactly 8 p.m., looking nothing like the composed professional he'd known for 12 years. Her normally perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a wrinkled jacket instead of her usual business attire, and dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days. But what struck Brendan most was how she moved. Gone was the confident stride of someone who commanded boardrooms and managed crises. Now she moved like prey, constantly checking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. Thank God you came, she said, crossing the observation deck quickly. She reached out to hug him, but Brendan stepped back. We need to talk. Something in his tone made her pause. For the first time since arriving, Sandra really looked at him, studying his expression with the analytical skills that had made her so effective in crisis management. You know, she said softly, I know about Derek Hicks. I know about the trafficking. I know about the storage unit and the insurance files and the $2 million you've made destroying people's lives. Sandra closed her eyes and leaned against the window, suddenly looking much older than her 34 years. How long have you known? Since Tuesday afternoon, when the police found your files on Tommy's school tablet. I was so careful, she whispered. I never used that iPad for anything personal. The files shouldn't have synced to the cloud. You used the same Apple ID for both devices. When Tommy tried to access the school network, it triggered an automatic backup. Sandra laughed bitterly. Brought down by iOS security features. There's some irony for you. They stood in silence for several minutes, the city lights twinkling below them like nothing had changed, like Brendan's world hadn't imploded in the space of 3 days. Why? He finally asked. Sandra was quiet for so long that Brendan thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you remember when Morrison and Associates laid me off 3 years ago? They said it was budget cuts, but we both knew the real reason. Richard Morrison brought in his nephew to take my position, and they needed an excuse to get rid of me. You bounced back from that. You started your own consulting firm. I tried to start my own consulting firm. Do you know how many clients I had after 6 months? 2. Both small companies that paid maybe $5,000 total. I was failing, Brendan. We were going to lose the house, Tommy's school, everything we'd built together. Brendan felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but he pushed it down. So you decided to become a criminal. I decided to accept a consulting contract that paid real money. Sandra turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Derek reached out through a mutual contact. He said he needed crisis management expertise for his logistics company. The pay was $50,000 for a 2-month contract. And you didn't question what kind of logistics required that level of crisis management? I didn't want to question it. We needed the money, Brendan. Tommy needed his school. We needed our house. And I needed to feel like I wasn't a complete failure. Sandra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. By the time I realized what Derek's business actually was, I was already in too deep. He had photos of me at meetings, recordings of conversations, financial records showing payments to my accounts. He made it clear that if I tried to leave, I'd go to prison and Tommy would lose both his parents. So you stayed. For 3 years. I stayed because I didn't have a choice. Sandra's voice cracked with desperation. And then I realized that Derek wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He was keeping terrible records, trusting people he shouldn't trust, making enemies in the government and law enforcement. I knew his operation would eventually collapse. So you started building your insurance policy. Sandra nodded. If I was going down, I was going to take everyone with me. But more than that, I thought if I could gather enough evidence, I could eventually make a deal with the FBI. Provide testimony in exchange for immunity. Brendan studied his wife's face, looking for signs of deception. What he saw was exhaustion, fear, and something that looked like genuine remorse. What changed? Why are you running now instead of making that deal? Because Derek found out about the insurance files. 3 days ago, he called me and said he knew I'd been copying his records. He said if I didn't turn over everything I'd collected and disappear permanently, he'd kill you and Tommy. The words hit Brendan like a physical blow. He threatened our son? He described our house in detail. Tommy's school schedule, your jogging route through the neighborhood. He knew everything about our lives. Brendan. I gave him the files and told him I was leaving Dallas forever. But you didn't give him everything. Sandra shook her head. I kept copies of the most damaging evidence. I thought I might need them for leverage if Derek ever came after us again. And now Derek's dead. Sandra went pale. What? They found him in his hotel room this morning. Professional hit, execution style. Which means his partners decided he was a liability. Oh God. Sandra gripped the window ledge for support. If Derek's dead, then they know about the insurance files. They'll think I'm the one who. You are the one who killed him, Brendan interrupted. Maybe not directly, but your evidence gathering and double-crossing made him vulnerable to his own people. They eliminated him to protect themselves, and now you're the only person who can bring them down. Sandra began crying in earnest now, great shuddering sobs that echoed across the empty observation deck. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to provide for our family. I wanted Tommy to have opportunities, to go to good schools, to have the kind of life I never had growing up. So you decided to destroy other people's families instead. The harshness in Brendan's voice made Sandra flinch. Those files in your storage unit, Sandra. Photos of children who were sold like property. Financial records showing how much money you made from their suffering. Don't you dare try to justify that as providing for our family. I know what I did was wrong. Wrong. Brendan's voice rose, causing the security guard to look up from his phone. Wrong is cheating on your taxes or having an affair. What you did was evil. You were complicit in destroying hundreds of lives, and you profited from it. Sandra straightened up, and for a moment Brendan saw a flash of the old Sandra, the crisis manager who never backed down from a fight. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't spent every day for the past 3 years hating myself for what I became? But I was trapped, Brendan. Once you're in that world, once you've taken their money and done their work, there's no clean way out. There's always a choice. Easy to say when you're not the one being blackmailed by murderers. They glared at each other across the observation deck. 12 years of marriage reduced to this moment of mutual recognition. Brendan saw who Sandra really was. Not just a criminal, but someone who'd chosen to save herself at the expense of innocent people. And Sandra saw something in Brendan's eyes that she'd never seen before. Cold, calculating fury. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you're going to help me fix this. Brendan, we need to run. Tonight. Take Tommy and disappear before Derek's people find us. I'm not running from criminals, Sandra. And I'm sure as hell not letting you disappear with blood money while your victims continue to suffer. Then what do you want me to do? Brendan pulled out his phone and opened the recording app. You're going to tell me everything. Every name, every location, every operation you know about. You're going to help me build a case that will destroy Derek's entire network. And if I refuse? Brendan showed her his phone screen, which displayed a draft email addressed to Detective Rodriguez. The email contained every piece of evidence he'd gathered over the past 3 days, along with Sandra's current location and a detailed explanation of her role in the trafficking operation. Then I send this message, and you spend the rest of your life in federal prison while Tommy grows up knowing his mother was a monster. Sandra stared at the phone for a long moment, then at Brendan's face, reading the determination there. You've changed, she said softly. You taught me to. Chapter 6. The Trap. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in Plano, paid for with cash and rented under a false name that wouldn't appear in any database. Brendan had spent Thursday morning setting up the location while Tommy was at school, installing surveillance equipment, and secure communication systems that would let them coordinate with law enforcement without revealing their position. Sandra sat at the kitchen table, looking like a defendant preparing for trial, which, in many ways, she was. Over the past 18 hours, she provided Brendan with a complete breakdown of Derek Hicks' organization: names, locations, operational schedules, financial networks, and political connections. The scope of the corruption was breathtaking. 3 federal judges, a dozen police officials, 2 city council members, and a state senator had all been receiving regular payments in exchange for protecting the trafficking operation. The network extended from Mexico to Canada, with processing centers in every major Texas city. "There's something else," Sandra said, reviewing her handwritten notes. Derek wasn't the top of the organization. He answered to someone called the director. "You never met this person?" "Never." Derek referred to him in phone calls, but always used that title. The director made all the major strategic decisions and controlled the political connections. Derek handled day-to-day operations. Brendan looked up from his laptop, where he was organizing Sandra's information into a comprehensive case file. Which means Derek's murder wasn't about eliminating competition. It was about eliminating a liability who knew too much about the director's identity. And now I'm the liability. Not just you. Anyone who had access to Derek's operational files is a potential threat. Sandra's phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at the screen and went pale. "What is it?" "Unknown number. Mrs. McGinnis, we need to discuss Derek's insurance policy. Tonight, 10 p.m., Dallas Arboretum main entrance. Come alone." Brendan frowned. The Arboretum is closed at night, which means they control access. This isn't a negotiation, it's an execution. Or an opportunity. Sandra stared at him. "You want me to go? I want us to end this." Brendan closed his laptop and moved to a duffel bag he'd brought from home. Inside were items that had nothing to do with cybersecurity consulting: night vision goggles, tactical radios, zip-tie restraints, and a Glock 19 that Sandra had never known he owned. "Brendan, what is this?" "Insurance. 20 years ago, before I got into cybersecurity, I spent 4 years in Army Special Operations. Most people don't know that because it's not relevant to my current career." Sandra's eyes widened. "You never told me you were in the military. You never told me you were a criminal who helped traffic human beings. Seems like we both kept secrets." Brendan began checking the equipment systematically, his movements efficient and professional. Sandra watched in fascination and growing concern as her mild-mannered computer consultant husband transformed into someone she'd never seen before. "What's the plan?" "Simple. You go to the meeting and confirm who we're dealing with. I'll be nearby with surveillance equipment, recording everything and coordinating with law enforcement. When we have enough evidence to prosecute, the FBI moves in. And if something goes wrong..." Brendan looked up from the weapons check, his expression cold and focused. "Then I handle it personally." At 9:30 p.m., the Dallas Arboretum was a maze of shadows and moonlight, its normally picturesque gardens transformed into something ominous and threatening. Sandra approached the main entrance wearing a wire and GPS tracker, her hands shaking despite her attempt to project confidence. 200 yards away, hidden in the tree line, Brendan monitored multiple feeds from miniature cameras he'd positioned around the meeting site. His laptop showed Sandra's location, vital signs from the wire, and communication feeds with FBI units stationed around the perimeter. At exactly 10 p.m., a black SUV pulled into the Arboretum's circular drive. 3 men emerged, 2 obvious muscle, and a third man who commanded immediate attention despite his unremarkable appearance. Lewis Chapman looked like a suburban accountant. Medium height, thinning brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a conservative suit that could have come from any department store. But the way he moved, the way the other men deferred to him, marked him as someone accustomed to absolute authority. "Mrs. McGinnis," Chapman said as Sandra approached. His voice was cultured, educated, with just a hint of Southern accent. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances. You're the director." "I prefer Mr. Chapman." The director was Derek's melodramatic nonsense. "I'm a businessman who solves problems." Chapman gestured to a bench near the entrance, inviting Sandra to sit. His bodyguards positioned themselves to block any escape routes. "Derek created several problems before his death," Chapman continued. The most significant being his failure to retrieve certain documents that could cause difficulties for our organization. I don't know what you're talking about. Chapman smiled, the expression somehow more threatening than any scowl could have been. Mrs. McGinnis, please don't insult my intelligence. Derek told us about your comprehensive record keeping. What we need to determine is whether you're an asset to be managed or a liability to be eliminated. 200 yards away, Brendan watched the conversation through his scope while FBI agents Rodriguez and Doyle listened through tactical radios. Do we have enough? Rodriguez whispered. Not yet, Brendan replied. We need him to admit to the trafficking operation and identify his other partners. On the bench, Sandra was fighting to maintain her composure. What kind of asset management are you offering? Relocation with a generous financial package in exchange for your files and your permanent silence. South America has excellent opportunities for someone with your crisis management skills. And if I refuse? Chapman's smile never wavered. Then you become a liability, and we handle liabilities very efficiently. Your husband and son would, of course, be considered part of the same liability. Sandra's wire picked up the sharp intake of her breath. You're threatening my family. I'm explaining consequences. Derek's organization touched many lives over the years. Judges, politicians, business leaders, law enforcement officials, people who've invested significant resources in maintaining their reputations and freedom. They won't allow one person's conscience to destroy everything they've built. How many people have you killed to protect this operation? Mrs. McGinnis, we prefer to think of it as cost-benefit analysis. Derek's death, for example, prevented complications that could have affected thousands of people's livelihoods. Yours would serve a similar purpose. Brendan keyed his radio. We've got conspiracy to commit murder and admission of organized criminal activity. That should be enough for arrest warrants. Moving in, Rodriguez confirmed. But Chapman wasn't finished. Before you make your decision, Mrs. McGinnis, you should know that we have comprehensive files on your husband's activities over the past week. His visit to your storage unit, his communication with law enforcement, his current location in the woods behind us. Sandra's face went white. What? Chapman pulled out a tablet and showed her surveillance photos of Brendan setting up his equipment. Did you really think we wouldn't notice FBI units moving into position around the Arboretum? Your husband's amateur hour detective work has been entertaining, but it ends tonight. Chapman made a gesture to his bodyguards, who began moving toward the tree. Take them both. Make it look like a murder-suicide, distraught husband kills criminal wife, then himself. That was when Brendan's military training took over. The first bodyguard made it exactly 15 steps toward the tree before a tranquilizer dart dropped him unconscious. The second man managed to draw his weapon before a flashbang grenade detonated at his feet, leaving him blind and disoriented long enough for FBI agents to tackle him. Chapman spun towards Sandra, reaching for a gun, but found himself staring down the barrel of Brendan's Glock as it emerged from the darkness. Lewis Chapman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, racketeering, and about 15 other federal crimes, Detective Rodriguez announced as FBI agents swarmed the area. Chapman's calm demeanor finally cracked. You have no idea what you've just done. The people I work with don't accept failure. Brendan stepped into the light, keeping his weapon trained on Chapman while FBI agents secured the scene. Then they're going to be very disappointed, he said quietly, because you just failed spectacularly. As they loaded Chapman into an FBI transport vehicle, Sandra approached Brendan with something like awe in her expression. How long have you been planning this? Since Tuesday afternoon, when I realized my wife was a criminal who'd been lying to me for 3 years. The safe house, the equipment, coordinating with law enforcement, you set all of this up in 4 days? Brendan holstered his weapon and began collecting his surveillance gear. Sandra, you spent 3 years building a criminal organization and thought you were clever enough to outsmart everyone. I spent 4 days building a trap to destroy that organization, and I succeeded completely. What happens to me now? Brendan looked at his wife, really looked at her, for the first time since this nightmare began. That depends on how much help you provide in prosecuting the rest of Chapman's network. Detective Rodriguez says the U.S. attorney is willing to discuss plea arrangements in exchange for testimony. And us? Our marriage. Brendan was quiet for a long moment, watching FBI agents process the crime scene that had once been his normal life. There is no us, Sandra. You made that choice when you decided to profit from other people's suffering. Tommy and I will be fine without you. As they walked back toward the FBI vehicles, Sandra made one last attempt to reach him. Brendan, please. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I love you. I love our son. That was always real. Brendan paused at his truck, considering her words. Maybe it was real for you. But love doesn't excuse what you did to those people. Love doesn't make you less responsible for the lives you destroyed. And love sure as hell doesn't make me forget that you chose to become someone I can't recognize. He got into his truck and drove away, leaving Sandra in FBI custody and his marriage in ruins. But for the first time since Tuesday afternoon, Brendan felt like himself again. Chapter 7. The Network Falls. The FBI's Dallas field office had been transformed into a war room. Charts covered every available wall space, mapping out Lewis Chapman's criminal network with the precision of a military campaign. Brendan sat at a conference table surrounded by federal agents, prosecutors, and evidence boxes containing the fruits of Sandra's 3-year documentation project. This is unprecedented, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Mills, reviewing Sandra's files for the third time. We're looking at RICO charges against 47 individuals, including 3 sitting judges and a state senator. Detective Rodriguez, who had become Brendan's unofficial liaison with law enforcement, pointed to an organizational chart on the main wall. Chapman's network moved over 800 people through Texas in the past 2 years. We're talking about one of the largest human trafficking operations in U.S. history. What's our prosecution timeline? Brendan asked. Fast, Mills replied. Chapman's arrest has spooked his political connections. We've already had 2 judges request early retirement, and the state senator announce he won't seek re-election. They're going to start destroying evidence and cutting deals if we don't move quickly. Brendan's phone buzzed with a secure message from an encrypted account he'd been monitoring. The message was simple: package delivered. Recommend immediate extraction. Excuse me, he told the room, stepping into the hallway to make a phone call. Andrew, it's Brendan. Is the package secure? Andrew Grant had been Brendan's commanding officer in special operations 20 years ago, and now ran a private security firm specializing in discrete problem solving. When Brendan had reached out 3 days ago, Andrew had been intrigued enough to take the job personally. Your intel was perfect. Andrew's voice came through the encrypted line. Chapman's offshore accounts contained $200 million spread across 12 countries. We've frozen all of it and transferred the funds to FBI control. What about the other assets? 3 warehouses for legitimate businesses being used for money laundering, and a very interesting property in the Cayman Islands that's been serving as a coordination center for the entire operation. Brendan allowed himself a small smile. While the FBI had been focused on arrests and prosecutions, he'd been working a parallel operation to dismantle Chapman's financial infrastructure. It wasn't technically legal, but it was effective. Any complications? Chapman's people tried to move money yesterday, but they were 12 hours too late. By the time they realized their accounts were compromised, everything was already secured. When Brendan returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had changed. Mills was on the phone with Washington, her voice excited and urgent. What's happening? Brendan asked Rodriguez. Your wife just provided testimony that connects Chapman's network to trafficking operations in 6 other states. We're looking at coordinated federal raids tomorrow morning. On cue, Sandra entered the conference room escorted by 2 U.S. Marshals. She'd been cooperating fully with the investigation, providing detailed testimony in exchange for a plea agreement that would reduce her sentence from life imprisonment to 15 years with possibility of parole in 8. She looked better than she had at the Arboretum, rested, composed, wearing the orange jumpsuit of federal custody-like armor. But when her eyes met Brendan's across the conference room, he saw something that looked like hope. The prosecutors want me to review the raid plans, she said, taking a seat across from him. Make sure they understand the security protocols at each location. And you're cooperating. I'm trying to make amends for what I did. Brendan studied his wife's face, looking for signs of the woman he'd thought he'd known for 12 years. What he saw was someone who'd been fundamentally changed by her experiences, harder, more calculating, but also perhaps more honest than she'd ever been. How's Tommy? She asked quietly. He's staying with my parents in Oklahoma until this is over. He thinks you're in the hospital recovering from an accident. When will you tell him the truth? when he's old enough to understand it. Sandra nodded, accepting the judgment. I've been thinking about what you said at the Arboretum, about love not excusing what I did. And you're right. I destroyed people's lives for money, and I told myself I was doing it for our family. But really, I was doing it for me. For my pride, my fear of failure, my need to feel important. Mills finished her phone call and addressed the room. Washington has approved coordinated raids in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, El Paso, and Brownsville. We move at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Mrs. McGinnis, we'll need you to walk us through the security protocols at each location one more time. For the next 4 hours, Sandra provided tactical intelligence that would make the difference between successful raids and potential disasters. She knew which facilities had armed security, which had escape routes, which contained evidence that could be destroyed quickly if the occupants had warning. The Houston warehouse is the most dangerous, she explained, pointing to blueprints spread across the table. Chapman kept his enforcement team there, ex-military contractors who won't surrender easily. How many people? Asked the FBI tactical commander. 6 to 8, all armed with military-grade weapons. They have surveillance equipment that will give them advance warning of any approach. Recommendations? Sandra looked uncomfortable, but answered professionally. Simultaneous assault from 3 directions. Cut power to the building first to disable their surveillance. And don't expect them to surrender. Chapman paid them well specifically because they were willing to kill federal agents if necessary. Brendan watched his wife transform into a tactical consultant, providing information that could save lives while simultaneously destroying the criminal empire she'd helped build. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd seen her do in years. As the meeting broke up, Sandra lingered while the others filed out. Brendan, can we talk privately? They moved to a smaller conference room, accompanied by a U.S. Marshal who positioned himself by the door. I want you to know that I understand why you can't forgive me, Sandra began. What I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know that everything I told you about Derek threatening our family was true. I believe you. And I need you to know that I never wanted this life. When I started working with Derek, I thought I could control the situation, use him to get back on my feet financially, then walk away clean. But you got in too deep. I got addicted to the money and the power. Do you know what it feels like to be the smartest person in the room? To have dangerous men listen to your advice and follow your plans? Brendan was quiet for a moment. Is that supposed to make me sympathetic? No. It's supposed to help you understand why I made the choices I made. So that when Tommy asks you about his mother someday, you can tell him I wasn't evil. Just weak and selfish and stupid. Sandra, you profited from the sale of human beings. Children, some of them. Evil might not be too strong a word. Sandra's composure finally cracked, tears rolling down her cheeks. I know what I am. I know what I did. But I also know that tomorrow's raids are going to save hundreds of people who are still trapped in Chapman's system. That has to count for something. Brendan looked at his wife crying in federal custody and felt nothing. No anger, no sympathy, no residual love. Just emptiness where 12 years of marriage used to be. It counts for something, he agreed. But not nearly enough. The next morning, Brendan watched the coordinated raids from the FBI's Tactical Operations Center. 6 cities, 14 locations, simultaneous assaults designed to prevent any warning or evidence destruction. By noon, federal agents had arrested 63 people and liberated 47 victims from various trafficking facilities. Chapman's network had been completely dismantled in a single morning. Your intelligence was perfect, Mills told Sandra as they reviewed the results. Every facility was exactly where you said it would be, with exactly the security measures you described. Sandra nodded, looking exhausted but perhaps also relieved. What happens next? You serve your sentence. But Mrs. McGinnis, I want you to understand something. Your cooperation today saved lives. The people we rescued from those facilities will have a chance at freedom because of the information you provided. After Sandra was taken back to her holding cell, Mills approached Brendan. Mr. McGinnis, I know this has been incredibly difficult for you and your son. But I want you to know that your wife's testimony and evidence will put these criminals away for the rest of their lives. What about the victims? The people who were trafficked? Full rehabilitation services, legal status assistance, and victim compensation from Chapman's seized assets. Your wife's documentation was so thorough that we can track down victims going back 3 years and provide them with the support they need. Brendan nodded, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't expected. "There's one more thing," Mills continued. "The FBI would like to offer you a consulting position with our cybercrime division. Your technical skills and tactical experience make you exactly the kind of person we need for cases like this." "I'll consider it." As Brendan left the federal building, his phone buzzed with a message from his parents in Oklahoma. Tommy had a great day at his new school. He made 3 new friends, and his teacher says he's adjusting well. "When are you coming to visit?" For the first time in a week, Brendan smiled. His son was safe. The criminals who had threatened their family were in custody, and tomorrow he could start building a new life from the ashes of his old one. Sandra had tried to destroy their family with her choices. Instead, she'd taught him that he was stronger than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 8. Justice Served. 6 months later, Brendan sat in the witness gallery of Federal District Court, watching his wife face sentencing for her role in one of the largest human trafficking prosecutions in Texas history. The courtroom was packed with victims, families, federal agents, and media representatives covering what had become known as the Chapman Network case. Sandra looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, flanked by federal defenders who had negotiated her plea agreement. She'd lost weight during her time in custody, and her once perfect appearance had given way to the harsh reality of federal detention. Judge Patricia Harrison reviewed the sentencing documents with meticulous care. At 63, she was known for her fairness and her particular disdain for crimes that exploited vulnerable people. "Mrs. McGinnis, you have pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit human trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. These are serious federal crimes that carry significant penalties." Sandra stood, her voice steady as she replied, "Yes, Your Honor. Before I impose sentence, I want to review what your cooperation has accomplished. Your testimony and evidence led to the conviction of 47 individuals involved in trafficking operations across 6 states. Your intelligence enabled law enforcement to rescue 63 victims and recover over $200 million in assets." Judge Harrison paused, looking directly at Sandra. "I also want to acknowledge the victims who are here today to provide impact statements. Mrs. Rodriguez, please proceed." Maria Rodriguez approached the podium, a slight woman in her early 20s who had been rescued from a Houston trafficking facility during the federal raids. She spoke in heavily accented English, but her words carried unmistakable strength. "Your Honor, I was 15 years old when men took me from my family in El Salvador. They promised my parents I would have work in America, send money home. Instead, they sold me like an animal." Maria's voice grew stronger as she continued. "For 3 years, I lived in hell. But when the FBI came to that warehouse, they gave me back my life. The woman who helped keep me prisoner is sitting right there, but she also helped set me free. I don't know how to feel about that." For more victims provided similar statements. Stories of brutal exploitation followed by rescue made possible by Sandra's cooperation. The contradiction was stark. The woman who had helped enslave them had also provided the evidence necessary for their liberation. When the victims' statements concluded, Judge Harrison called for Sandra's final statement before sentencing. Sandra approached the podium, her hands shaking slightly as she began to speak. "Your Honor, I want to start by apologizing to every person whose life was damaged by my actions. I told myself I was trapped, that I didn't have choices, but that was a lie. I had choices every single day, and I chose money over human decency." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "I chose to look the other way when I saw evidence of what was really happening to these people. I chose to take money that came from their suffering. I chose to help build systems that made their exploitation more efficient." Sandra turned to face the victims in the gallery. "I can't undo what I did to you. I can't give you back the years that were stolen from you. But I want you to know that helping the FBI destroy this network wasn't about reducing my sentence. It was about trying to make sure no one else would suffer the way you suffered." She turned back to Judge Harrison. "Your Honor, I deserve to be punished for my crimes. But I hope the court will consider that the evidence I provided has helped law enforcement identify and prosecute trafficking networks in 12 other states. The investigation I helped start has rescued over 200 additional victims and led to arrests across the entire Southwest." Judge Harrison reviewed her notes one final time before delivering the sentence. "Mrs. McGinnis, your crimes were serious and your participation in human trafficking operations directly contributed to immeasurable human suffering. However, Your cooperation with law enforcement has been extraordinary and has resulted in the rescue of hundreds of victims. Therefore, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole in 6 years contingent on continued cooperation with federal authorities in related prosecutions. Sandra nodded, accepting the sentence with what looked like relief. As the court adjourned, Brendan made his way through the crowd toward the prosecution table where Assistant U.S. Attorney Mills was packing her files. "How do you feel about the sentence?" she asked. "It's fair," Brendan replied. "She pays a significant price for her crimes, but her cooperation is rewarded appropriately. Mr. McGinnis, I wanted to let you know that your wife's intelligence has opened investigations in 4 other federal districts. We expect to file charges against at least 30 additional individuals over the next year." Mills paused, studying Brendan's expression. "She asks about you and Tommy regularly, about how you're adjusting to your new life. How we're adjusting is none of her concern anymore. Of course, but I thought you should know that she turned down a request to reduce her sentence in exchange for testimony against some of Chapman's political connections. She said she'd already caused enough damage to your family and didn't want to extend the media attention." Brendan was surprised by this information, but he kept his expression neutral. "That doesn't change anything. I didn't expect it to. I just thought you should know." As Brendan left the federal courthouse, he found Detective Rodriguez waiting by his truck. "How'd the sentencing go?" 12 years, eligible for parole in 6. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Fair sentence for someone who cooperated as extensively as she did. Stephen, I wanted to thank you for how you handled this case. You could have treated me as a suspect, made things difficult for Tommy and me. Brendan, it was pretty clear from the beginning that you were a victim in this situation. Besides, your work with our cybercrime unit over the past 6 months has been invaluable." Rodriguez was referring to Brendan's new consulting role with the FBI, specializing in financial crimes and human trafficking investigations. It turned out that 20 years of cybersecurity experience and 4 years of military training made him uniquely qualified to track criminal networks through digital footprints. "Speaking of which," Rodriguez continued, "we've got a new case I'd like you to look at. Similar pattern to Chapman's network, but based in Arizona and New Mexico. Send me the files. I'll review them tonight." As they shook hands, Rodriguez made one final observation. "Brendan, I know this has been hell for you and your son, but the work you're doing now, helping us shut down these networks, it's making a real difference. The people we've rescued because of your skills, they get to go home to their families." Brendan drove back to his new apartment in Plano, where Tommy was waiting with homework spread across the kitchen table. His son had adapted to their new life with the resilience that children sometimes displayed in the face of adult chaos. "How was school today, buddy?" "Good. We're learning about fractions, and I got an A on my science project about solar systems." Tommy looked up from his math worksheet, his expression growing serious. "Dad, when is Mom coming home from the hospital?" It was a question Brendan had been dreading for months. He'd managed to avoid direct answers by distracting Tommy with new activities, new schools, new friends. But his son was getting older, asking more pointed questions, and deserved some version of the truth. Brendan sat down at the table across from his son. "Tommy, Mom isn't in the hospital. She's in jail because she did some things that hurt people." Tommy's eyes widened, but he didn't seem shocked. 7-year-olds were remarkably good at sensing when adults weren't telling them the complete truth. "What kind of things?" "She helped some bad men hurt innocent people. When the police found out, she had to go to jail as punishment." "Is she coming home?" "Not for a very long time. Maybe not ever." Tommy was quiet for several minutes, processing this information with the seriousness that the situation deserved. "Are you mad at her?" Brendan considered the question carefully. "I'm disappointed in the choices she made. But mostly, I'm focused on taking care of you and making sure we have a good life together." "Do you still love her?" It was perhaps the hardest question his son could have asked. Brendan looked into Tommy's eyes and gave him the most honest answer he could. "I love the person I thought she was. But that person turned out to be someone different than who Mom really was. Does that make sense?" Tommy nodded with the wisdom that children sometimes displayed when confronting adult complexities. "I think so. It's like when I thought Marcus was my friend, but then he was mean to Emily at recess. I still like the Marcus I thought I knew, but not the real Marcus." "That's exactly right." They finished Tommy's homework together, ate dinner, and watched a movie before bedtime. It was a normal evening in their new normal life, quiet, peaceful, and honest in ways their old life had never been. As Brendan tucked his son into bed, Tommy made one final observation that surprised him. "Dad, I know Mom did bad things, but I'm glad she helped the police catch the other bad people too." "Why's that, buddy?" "Because even when people make mistakes, they should try to fix them if they can." Brendan kissed his son's forehead and turned off the light, marveling at the moral clarity that children possessed before the world complicated their thinking. In the living room, he opened his laptop and reviewed the case files Rodriguez had sent. Another trafficking network, another group of criminals who thought they were too smart to be caught, another opportunity to use his skills to protect innocent people. 6 months ago, his life had been built on lies and secrets. Now it was built on purpose and truth. Sandra had tried to destroy their family with her choices. Instead, she'd taught him who he really was and what he was capable of when pushed to fight for what mattered. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was a life he could be proud of. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 2 years later, Brendan stood in the backyard of their new house in Austin, watching Tommy practice soccer drills with his team from the local youth league. At 9 years old, his son had grown into a confident, happy kid who excelled in school and had made close friends in their new community. The house itself was smaller than their old place in Dallas, but it was theirs, bought with money from Brendan's legitimate cybersecurity consulting work, not criminal proceeds. The FBI had eventually cleared all their assets from the forfeiture investigation, but Brendan had chosen to start fresh anyway, selling everything connected to their old life and building something new. "Mr. McGinnis?" Brendan turned to see Andrew Grant approaching across the yard. His former commanding officer looked exactly the same as he had during their special operations days, lean, alert, comfortable in his own skin. "Andrew, good to see you." "Likewise. How's the new job treating you?" 6 months ago, Brendan had accepted a position as senior cybersecurity analyst with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force, specializing in financial investigations and digital forensics. The work was challenging, meaningful, and had taken him across the country as trafficking networks became increasingly sophisticated in their use of technology. "Can't complain. We shut down 3 major networks last quarter, rescued 47 victims, and seized over $100 million in assets." Impressive numbers. "And Tommy?" Brendan glanced at his son, who was laughing with his teammates as their coach set up a scrimmage game. "He's doing great. Straight A's in school, made the select soccer team, has more friends than he knows what to do with." "Has he asked about Sandra recently?" It was a question Andrew had been gently probing for the past year. As someone who'd seen combat and understood the psychological costs of betrayal, he'd been concerned about how both Brendan and Tommy would process the long-term implications of Sandra's actions. Less frequently now. He knows she's in prison and that she did things that hurt people. He writes her letters sometimes, but he doesn't ask when she's coming home anymore. That's probably healthy. "Yeah, I think so too." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the kids play soccer while other parents gathered along the sidelines. It was a scene of suburban normalcy that would have been impossible 2 years ago, when Brendan's life had been built on lies he hadn't even known existed. "Brendan, I wanted to ask you about something," Andrew said finally. "I've got a consulting contract that might interest you." "What kind of contract?" "Private sector anti-trafficking work. A coalition of tech companies wants to develop better systems for identifying and disrupting trafficking networks online. They need someone with your combination of technical skills and operational experience." Brendan was intrigued. What would that look like? Primarily remote work, but well compensated and focused on prevention rather than prosecution. Building systems that make trafficking operations harder to establish and maintain. "I'll consider it." Andrew handed him a business card with contact information for the tech coalition. "No pressure, but I thought you might be interested in expanding your impact beyond federal law enforcement." As Andrew prepared to leave, he made one final observation that Brendan had been thinking about lately. "You know, what Sandra did to your family was unforgivable. But the work you've done since then, the networks you've helped shut down, the people you've helped rescue, it's turned her betrayal into something positive. That takes a special kind of person." After Andrew left, Brendan joined the other parents on the sideline, cheering as Tommy scored a goal that put his team ahead. His son looked over and waved, face bright with happiness and pride. Later that evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Brendan sat at his kitchen table reviewing case files from his current FBI assignment. The work was challenging but satisfying, using technology and financial analysis to dismantle criminal networks that preyed on vulnerable people. His secure phone rang with a call from Detective Rodriguez, who had been promoted to head the FBI's Dallas Trafficking Task Force. "Brendan, I've got an update on the Chapman Network prosecutions." "Good news." "Very good. The last of Chapman's political connections was sentenced today. State Senator Williams got 12 years, and federal Judge Morrison got 15. That's the entire corruption network behind bars." Brendan felt a sense of closure he hadn't expected. "What about victim compensation?" "Over $300 million recovered and distributed to trafficking survivors. Your wife's documentation made it possible to track down victims going back 5 years and provide them with comprehensive support services." Rodriguez paused before continuing. "Brendan, I also wanted to let you know that Sandra's up for her first parole review next year. How do you think that'll go?" "Hard to say. She's been a model prisoner, continued cooperating with federal investigations, and helped us identify trafficking networks in 8 other states. But parole boards are unpredictable, especially for human trafficking cases." "Has she asked to see Tommy?" "Multiple times. But she's respected your decision to limit contact." After ending the call, Brendan poured himself a whiskey and stepped out onto his back porch. The Austin skyline glowed in the distance, a reminder of the new life he and Tommy had built from the ashes of their old one. 2 years ago, his world had collapsed when he discovered that the woman he'd trusted with his heart and future was a criminal who had betrayed everything he believed in. The revelation had nearly destroyed him, but it had also revealed strengths he hadn't known he possessed. He'd learned that love without trust was meaningless, that family was about more than blood relationships, and that sometimes the people closest to you were capable of the most devastating betrayals. But he'd also learned that betrayal didn't have to define him, that he could choose to transform pain into purpose, loss into growth, and personal tragedy into meaningful work that protected other people from similar harm. Sandra had tried to destroy their family with her choices. Instead, she'd taught him who he really was when everything he'd built was stripped away. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. McGinnis, this is Maria Rodriguez. I was one of the victims rescued from Chapman's operation. I wanted to thank you for the work you're doing. Because of people like you, my sister and I are both free and safe in America now. We think about your family often and hope you are happy." Brendan smiled as he typed back. "Maria, thank you for reaching out. Tommy and I are doing very well, and knowing that you and your sister are safe makes our difficult journey worthwhile. Stay strong and build a beautiful life." As he prepared to go inside, Brendan's phone rang one more time. Tommy's voice called from his bedroom upstairs. "Dad, can you come up here? I want to ask you something." Brendan climbed the stairs and found his son sitting up in bed, looking thoughtful in the way that 9-year-olds did when they were processing complex emotions. "What's on your mind, buddy?" "I was thinking about Mom today, about the bad things she did." Brendan sat on the edge of the bed. "What about them? Do you think she's sorry?" "Really sorry, not just sorry she got caught." It was a sophisticated question that showed how much Tommy had grown in the past 2 years. Brendan considered his answer carefully. "I think she's sorry about the pain she caused people, including you and me. But more importantly, I think she's trying to make up for what she did by helping the police catch other bad people." "Is that enough? What do you think?" Tommy was quiet for several minutes, working through the moral complexity of the situation with the seriousness it deserved. "I think sorry isn't enough to fix what she broke. But trying to help people is better than not trying." Brendan felt a surge of pride at his son's moral clarity. "That's very wise, Tommy." "Dad, I'm glad we moved to Austin. I like our new life." "Me too, son. Me too." After tucking Tommy back into bed, Brendan returned to his porch and looked up at the Texas stars. Somewhere in a federal prison, Sandra was serving time for her crimes while continuing to cooperate with investigations that were saving lives. Somewhere across the country, victims of trafficking were rebuilding their lives with resources recovered from criminal enterprises. And here in Austin, he and Tommy were building something new, a family based on honesty, purpose, and the knowledge that they were strong enough to survive anything. Sandra had tried to destroy them with her betrayal. Instead, she'd given them the opportunity to discover who they really were when everything else was stripped away. It wasn't the life Brendan had planned, but it was a life he could be proud of. A life built on truth instead of lies, purpose instead of comfort, and love that was earned rather than assumed. As he went inside to prepare for another day of work protecting vulnerable people from predators like his ex-wife had once been, Brendan reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. 2 years ago, he'd been a suburban cybersecurity consultant living a comfortable life. Now he was a federal agent whose work had helped rescue hundreds of trafficking victims and dismantle criminal networks across multiple states. Sandra McGinnis had thought she was smart enough to build a criminal empire while maintaining the facade of a normal family life. She'd been wrong about a lot of things, but most of all, she'd been wrong about her husband. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.